Good afternoon. This is the time and place for the Legal and Finance Committee meeting of April 2, 2025. We'll begin with roll call and determination of quorum.
Beaverdorf.
Here.
Evans.
Here.
Mocker.
Here.
Roseland.
Here.
Stroman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Next item is adoption of the agenda. We got a motion by Roseland and a second by Evans to adopt the agenda. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is general public comment. This is a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the council on any issue not on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda, except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. And I have no speaker request forms for general public comment, so I'm going to close general public comment. And then we're going to go to consent items 1 through 12, and I will open public comment on items 1 through 12. And again, having no speaker request forms, I'm going to close public comment on consent items 1 through 12. Next, I'm going to ask if there's any members of the committee who wish to remove any items from the consent items for separate consideration, or if they wish to make a motion to vote on the items as a whole. We have a motion by Beaverdorf and a second by Roseland to adopt the consent agenda. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the end of the consent calendar. Now we'll go to non-consent items 13 through 15, and I'll open public comment on non-consent items 13 through 15. And again, have no public comment notices, so I'm going to close public comment. And we'll go to item 13, which is a presentation from Water Utility System about the Water Utility System Master Plan presented by Black & Veatch, but introduced by the very capable Morgan Falcone that was appointed by the city engineer to handle that task.
Good afternoon, council members. Morgan, yeah, that's my name. I'm a civil engineer with the City of Rapid City and had the opportunity to be the project manager for the Water Utility System Master Plan. I had the pleasure of working with Black & Veatch on this project, and I'd like to introduce Sean Labonde with Black & Veatch. He was the project manager on the consultant side to present the Water Utility System Master Plan to you.
Thank you, Morgan. Well, good afternoon. I'm glad to cover some of the presentation for the Water Utility System Master Plan. I'm going to do my best to boil down about 600 pages in a final report and about 1,800 pages of supporting appendices into 12 slides in about 15 minutes. So I would encourage you, we linked an executive briefing, which is about 20 pages, gives you a little more background on what we're going to present today. I would encourage you to read that because it does kind of bring things into focus and takes about an hour to read. But so a little bit.
Don't be insulted if I slip out. I watched it yesterday. I've already got your sheet. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. A little bit about the objectives and achievements. There's 4 items in the objectives time frame or category. The top 2 items are really traditional water master planning topics where we revise population and water demand projections and develop capital improvement plans out into the future. For this study, we pushed capital improvement plans out to 2115, so really 100 years into the future. Item 3 is an asset management component where we did condition assessments and replacement planning for existing facilities as well as buried pipelines. That's something that was brought into this study. And then the 4th item is policy and process guidance for several city documents, revisions to the infrastructure design criteria manual, a review of the current engineering submittal requirements, and then we put in place a process for amendment and revision of this master plan moving forward. So let's talk now a little bit about the results from the master plan. The first topic is population growth, and we use city planning data that not only projects the total population growth through 2115, but the spatial distribution of that population within the service area. And you can see some of the growth rates historically from 1985 through 2115, and then pushing out into the future. And in the table, I've got the numbers that show our master plan is based on a 2115 population close to 155,000 people, and that's about double what it is, a little over double what it is today. So what's important to note from the population projection is that population drives water demand. And so that's the first component of how much water do we need into the future through 2115 to meet the projected demands. I threw in some historical information in this table. The 1985 municipal water system study projected in 2005 that its population of Rapid City would be about 79,000, and that was 20% higher than what it actually was. And then likewise, in the 2008 master plan, they projected a 2025 population of 98,000, and that's about 15% higher than we're projecting currently. So I want you to keep that in mind, that the 15 to 20% higher population projection, and I'll show you the impact it has on water demand projections in a couple of slides. We also develop service areas for 2025, 2045, and 2115 so that we can understand the distribution system and its components that are needed to serve water into the future. The 2025 boundary and 2045 boundary were basically developed on existing boundaries that exist for 2025. It was the 2015 city limits, with then changes and modifications around the boundary where we knew there was development occurring or was projected to occur in the near term. The 2045 boundary was baselined off of the city's comprehensive plan in the urban service boundary. In 2115, we set that boundary up based on a density evaluation. So because we have a spatial distribution of the population growth, we can determine what the density of development would be for residential areas. And we said that any densities that are lower than 1 unit, housing unit per 5 acres, that's going to be outside the service area. So those are properties that are 10, 20, 40 acre lots and better served by private water systems or rural water systems, really not a municipal based system like the city has. I also threw in some regional comparisons that as you have increasing sizes of cities, what those densities, people per square mile is, and you can see Rapid City currently is about 1,358 people per square mile compared to Omaha and Denver up in the 4,000s. I will note that this master plan pushing forward into 2115 really doesn't change that density. So you might say that as populations increase, we're going to get more and more dense, but the distribution of that population shows us that that Rapid City is projected to stay about the same. Now that may change decades from now, but for the purposes of this master plan, that density really does not increase. So the next step is we take that service area and the population and we develop water demand forecasts. And there's 3 important criteria to consider. The first is average day demand. It's the total annual water produced divided by the number of days in any year. And so in million gallons per day, the city's current or 2025 average day demand, that's the blue line on this graph to the right. It's 11.5 MGD or million gallons per day, and it's projected to grow to 20 million gallons per day by 2115. Maximum day demand is the second criteria, and it's important because it's basically used to size the supply facilities for water treatment plants, groundwater wells, infiltration galleries, so we have enough water to push out into the system on a maximum day. And that maximum day demand is the maximum quantity of water used during one day each year, and it usually occurs in July or August, depending on the weather patterns, depending on the temperatures, and it's that single maximum day use. The third category then that affects the demand forecast is the per capita use rate in gallons per person per day. And the graph on the bottom shows the historical downward trend of that usage from about 200 220 gallons per person per day in the early 2000s down to what it is now at 120 gallons per person per day. And so that's essentially a 50-60% reduction. And we've seen this trend across the western United States, certainly as water conservation efforts become more aggressive and the low-flow plumbing fixtures get integrated into the model building codes and the plumbing codes. That downward trend has been very consistent. So in this master plan, we arrived at a per capita use rate of 135 gallons per person per day. In the 2008 master plan, based on the data they had used, they arrived basically at a 200 gallon per person per capita use rate. So when I talked about over projecting earlier the population, and then we layer in a 200 gallon per person per day demand, in the graph at the right, what that forecast meant in 2008 is a maximum day demand of 52 million gallons per day. That was projected down in 2030. Based on this updated master plan, the 2030 maximum day demand is now estimated at 28 million gallons per day. And that's a pretty significant finding from this master plan when you start to draw down the water demand, because now it also means less capital improvements, smaller sizes of facilities, because your demands aren't up at the 52 million gallons per day, they're much lower. Wrong way. I did want to make note too that part of the demands that we've projected includes a contingency for wholesale customers into the future. The city currently has 4 wholesale customers to supply peaking capacity or emergency service connections, and we've carried that contingency forward into the future at 16% of the total water demand. So once we have the water demands, the next component that was important was to determine, do we have an adequate supply of water in terms of available water rights? And we did a pretty intensive review of the city's existing water rights to determine, are they good enough into the future through 2115? We kind of framed that evaluation under 3 supply scenarios, and that's the 3 figures that you see here. In each one of the figures, the top line is the source of supply available water rights. So gray line is surface water, green line is groundwater through Minaloosa and Madison aquifer wells. So in the first scenario, which was figure 4, that's a normal weather pattern. There's normal to above normal natural flow in Rapid Creek and normal precipitation patterns. And the full access to your water rights totals over 90 million gallons per day, 75 MGD through surface water. And you can see that that is 2x or 3x larger than the forecasted demand in 2045 and 2115. So your current water rights portfolio under those normal conditions is very robust and provides you with a high degree of reliability. Okay, so the next scenario, we said, well, there's a moderate drought in force, and it results in a call on the junior water rights in Rapid Creek. And when that happens, the city loses access to those water rights, and you can see the gray bar was 75 MGD in figure 4. When you get to figure 5, it's reduced to 22 MGD. So that's the water that's lost to this call that is basically 1960s water rights priority and newer. If you retain the 1870s and 1880s and 40s and 50s water rights, then adding in the groundwater, you're still in a pretty good condition in 2045, but pretty close to the max day demand in 2115. So a couple of notes here is you can see the importance of your groundwater system in terms of providing resiliency for water supply during drought periods. The second item to remember is that the city has storage rights available in Pactola and Deerfield Reservoir. And the way that water right, those storage rights are written, is if you lose water supply due to a call on Rapid Creek for those junior rights, you're able to use the storage that's in Pactola Reservoir to replace those. So again, very important from a resiliency standpoint to ride those moderate droughts out, and the city appears to be well positioned out into the future for those. The figure 6 then was the most severe drought condition, and it's a multi-year drought where inflows into Rapid Creek natural flows are greatly reduced, and the city has utilized the storage rights, drawing Pactola Reservoir down below 25%. So when you get to that level, the city ordinance says we will enforce an outdoor watering ban in the city. This is a multi-year deal. We can't recover storage in Pactola, and in that condition, your maximum day demands are going to be reduced to what the indoor demand is typical of November through, say, March each year. And so you can see the blue bars and the orange bars in figure 6 are much lower because year-round we're only using indoor water. And now we show the value of the groundwater supply at 18 MGD that exceeds those indoor water demands. So the resiliency that the groundwater supplies to you is very important. Recommendations in the master plan report is to continue to protect and build that resiliency through acquisition of more senior water rights when they become available, as well as to develop future use ground rights in the Madison Aquifer that the city currently has. As a result of the master plan, the outcome of that, the city has numerous tools now you can use to evaluate scenarios moving forward. There's 4 date-stamped versions of the hydraulic model that can be used to evaluate development or other scenarios that might come up. We have a water facility replacement model that establishes the condition and estimated remaining useful life for the existing water system facilities and calls for their replacement over the 100-year period. And then we have a pipeline replacement model that's a data-driven, risk-based prioritization that really scores and ranks all 34,000 segments in the system to replace them over the time period. So the graph at the bottom was interesting because it shows the pipe material installation date by decade. And you can see in the 2000s and 2010s that the majority of the pipe installed in the city is now PVC pipe. It has an estimated service life of 120 years. If I go to the other end in the 1950s and 60s, you can see the gray bar represents ductile iron pipe that was installed in those 2 decades. And our service life estimate for ductile iron here is 70 years. So in 2020s now, we're into that 70-year time frame where that older ductile iron pipe is beginning to reach the end of its useful life. When we roll all of the planning exercise up, we developed a 100-year capital improvement plan for the city. And we divided the improvements into 3 categories. The blue lines really show ongoing system improvements. It has pipeline and facility replacement priorities, as well as localized improvements for pressure, fire flow, and reliability. We developed 6 capacity improvement programs, and these are larger programs that are needed to rectify capacity constraints that exist currently in the city's system, or provide capital programs for use out into the future, such as the East Water Treatment Plant Program and the Southeast Supply Program. So that will position the city for growth in the southeast area of the city. And then that's the capacity improvement programs are the green colored projects, and then the gold colored category is really growth and hydraulic based improvements that would go out through 2115 to extend the system out to that service area boundary. Every project that we identified as a CIP project has a data sheet. And here's a couple of examples where we identify the project description, the scope, and the estimated cost in 2021 dollars. And it shows the extent of what's intended for that project. So the city can use this to start to develop scope of work documents for engineering and construction procurement On the left is a pipeline replacement project. On the right, we have a hydraulic growth-based improvement in the North Rapid zone for pipelines that's shown. We also provided a little more detail for each one of the capacity improvement programs, and this is for the East Water Treatment Plant program that not only includes just the water treatment plant facility itself, but all of the connecting pipelines that are required to integrate it into the distribution system. And so a little more detail has been provided on the capacity improvement programs. So here's the results then for the capital improvement plans, and we essentially rolled up two versions of it. An unconstrained version, which should be considered a high growth, where growth continues to be robust within the city, and we need to start building infrastructure to serve water to that growth, versus the constrained CIP that says maybe it'll be a little slower than was anticipated, and some of the improvements that are planned will be pushed beyond 2045 or further out into the future. And that way you get a representative bookend approach for, high growth versus low growth. The other term we used was proactive and less proactive, and that really comes into the improvement program. But from a funding perspective, the unconstrained represents $17.5 million annual average spend over 100 years in capital improvements. The constrained represents a lower $10.5 million annual average. At the bottom of this table, then, the capacity improvement programs, some other differences. The capacity improvement programs in unconstrained are developed in the first 20 years, where you can see in the constrained version, we push that out to 30 years of development. And then the big price difference really comes in from the pipeline replacement program. So in the unconstrained, to replace about 76% of the total pipeline length through 2115, we had about 56 city blocks per year in the first 10 years. And that was determined to be maybe a resource challenge for the engineering and construction industry to actually get that amount of work done year over year over year. And so in the constrained version of the CIP, we dialed that back to something that we thought was more reasonable, and that's 15 city blocks per year. And what happens, though, instead of replacing 76% of that total pipeline length, now you only replace about 19% of it. So how that might manifest itself is the city may start to experience increased water main breakage for that ductile iron pipe that was installed in the 50s and 60s, because you're not getting enough of it replaced with the constrained CIP. Yeah, so that's the quick summary then of our master plan, and I think I will open it up for any questions and comments that you might have.
Thank you. We'll go to Kevin Maher.
Yeah, thank you. This is very interesting. Can you comment about, the long-range plan of possibly piping Missouri River water to the Black Hills?
Sure, that was considered as part of this, but when we coupled the reduction in demand that we saw from the 2008 master plan and forecast that out, your existing water rights portfolio appears to be adequate through 2115. So our recommendation in the water master plan was to continue to track the development of that Missouri River water source and be a participant as it moves along. But right now, it's a longer term project and expenditure for the city beyond 2115. Now, if the city decides to be a regional water supplier and wants to participate in that for other reasons, that's okay. There are other reasons to participate in that program. However, your existing water rights portfolio is adequate currently through 2115.
One more on that. We've heard about potentially a data center coming to Rapid City that uses a lot of water, and do you see those data centers becoming more efficient so they don't use so much water?
That water use is largely driven by cooling requirements. Right. And so if you replace the the water cooling based technology with more chiller based, then your electric demand goes up. So we're either using water or electricity for cooling purposes, and that's you know, a large part of that is driven by price. So if this data center developer can get water cheaper, they'll start to push the city for that. We see some other requests in the Denver area that's a 3 to 4 million gallon per day demand. And while the city may have overall an aggregate water supply that's adequate, I think where the pressure comes, or the pinch point comes in, is that it's in a localized area in a commercial development. And we may only have 8-inch water mains that don't have capacity for that point load of 3 to 4 million gallons. And so the impact as part of that development needs to be evaluated through the hydraulic model, can be used as a tool to do that, to say maybe these 8-inch mains need to be 12-inch mains or 16-inch mains to supply water directly to that area specifically. So it becomes a localized challenge then to develop, to deliver that amount of water. And that has to be evaluated as part of the development for the data center.
Go to Bill Evans.
Yeah, thank you. I just, not so much a question for you, but a comment. Yesterday, John Roberts asked about HDPE, high-density polyethylene pipe, because it's manufactured here, and your answer was that, yeah, it's excellent, but it's expensive, and it's used mainly in longer sections because the couplings are harder to get, although it's very durable and everything. So it was a good question, and I think it's something worth exploring. And another comment about overbuilding or underbuilding. If you've been around here as long as I have been, the city has sometimes overbuilt and sometimes underbuilt. And when we get caught with our pants down is when we've underestimated what's going to happen here. I know that back when original Central High down the street was built, they didn't open the top 2 floors for many years. They overbuilt it. But then all of a sudden, when the city boomed and doubled in size quickly, as it's done a couple times over its history, all of a sudden those things are used, and it's way cheaper to plan ahead a little bit to overbuild. So I'd caution us that we don't go on the cheap and we start thinking about if it would be called the worst case scenario when it comes to growth, which would be large growth, that we plan ahead that way, because it's always harder to go back and replace something with something bigger. So I'd say we plan ahead for the maximum growth that we can in the future if we use this study. And I want to also caution us, you know, studies like these, sometimes they cost a lot of money and they're never used at all. Other people would say that we should be doing these in-house, and perhaps this one could have been accomplished, I don't know. I appreciate your expertise in this area, but we got to make sure it doesn't end up on the shelf and not be utilized. And so it just ends up becoming an expensive paperweight again, like some of our other studies we've outsourced have become. Thank you.
Anybody else? I just have a quick question, sir. You know, in Rapid City, we're blessed with really good water, and I challenge you to find better water anywhere. We have a dedicated, skilled employees that manage our water system, and it's the most valuable resource I think we have. But you know, you've got a projection here of more than, you know, between 2025 and 2045, just geographic area, from 62 square miles to 97. That's an increase of 56%, and that's going to put a big strain on. And I appreciate your forecasting our needs for maintenance and expansion and how we would do that. One thing that strikes me is, as a governing body, we don't really seem to have much for ways to encourage less use, other than, well, okay, if we get in a drought situation, we have an outdoor watering ban. Are there other things that we could do from a governmental side that would conserve or encourage less consumption, or does it even matter? Does it all just go down the river if we don't use it? I mean, I don't even think Pactola is very close to full right now. I don't know. I haven't been out there, but I'm just wondering, what else can we be doing to conserve water other than an outdoor watering ban?
Couple ideas, and agree that an outdoor watering ban is extreme. So it's got to be, an extreme event to progress to that, and you have the difficult challenge then of also enforcing that outdoor watering ban. If you lose the surface water right, though, if you lose that surface water source, you'll go to that. Many cities don't have the groundwater resources as a backup. So you're step one, you're in a very good situation. With regards to reducing the overall water use, one of the recommendations we made in the master plan was to reconsider some intermediate stages within that water conservation ordinance. So the utilities along the Front Range of Colorado now have a drought stage designation where they go from stage 0 to stage 4. And each step they go, they ratchet up the conservation requirements. So the city of Rapid City really doesn't change anything in the water conservation ordinance. I took some notes on this. As you work from normal to concern to alert, Pactola reservoir level falls to 50%. And in each one of those stages, the outdoor watering during the summer months really doesn't change. So it's an odd, even schedule. And then you start to crimp down on the months. What the utilities along the Front Range of Colorado have done is they'll go from 3 or 4 days of watering per week at that alert stage down to 2 days a week. And so that really helps save that level in Pactola that's still remaining below the 50% and starts to crimp that down. So that's one recommendation that actually got made, is reconsider this more staged approach to the Pactola reservoir levels and that water conservation ordinance. The second item that we've really kind of talked about in other areas is reuse. So you take basically the wastewater, effluent water, treat it to a level that then it can be used for irrigation on green belts and golf courses, and that helps then displace potable water or drinking water that is used for that now. There's always state level water rights law that has to be considered in that, because in Colorado, for example, there are certain water sources that have a return flow requirement that cannot be used for subsequent use on greenbelt irrigation. So the water rights, I'm not familiar entirely with how return flow rights are regulated in South Dakota, but that has to be reviewed. So reuse is something very commonly used. Even further into the Southwest than in Arizona, there's a big push for direct potable reuse. We're seeing that across the industry, that I don't really see that emphasis here in Rapid City. That's where the more severe drought in the desert Southwest is taking hold. They're going to that level. So, but do think about the water conservation ordinance. There's some room there to make that more staged in its nature.
Great.
So.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Go back to Bill Evans, please.
Thank you. You piqued another couple of questions. We talk about planning ahead and everything, and you mentioned Pactola and Deerfield. If ever there was great planning, back in the 40s, this is great planning. And at the time, Rapid City wouldn't have used a fraction of all that water. But if it wasn't there, we'd have some major issues now. So it's important to plan ahead. Now, when I was in architecture school in the 70s, and I'd get the journal, the Rapid City Journal down in Lincoln, and read the paper every day and studying this, all this talk about Lake Box Elder and all this big reservoir that was going to be built north of the city. And if you ever drive up there, the big draws that we have, there could be gigantic reservoir storage north of the city. And that was a big plan some 50 years ago or more. And I haven't heard anything about these plans. And I go to all these water meetings that we have concerning the pipeline and everything. And I keep asking, you want to bring that water out here. And then when we don't need it, where do we store it? And why don't we trap that runoff that seems to hit, 4 or 5 inches, these storms we get there in the Piedmont Valley all the time, and all that water just runs off all the time. I think our biggest problem is here is we don't have water storage. And and I think reservoirs are the way to go. And now land prices are 10 times what they were back when they were talking about it, and that's probably a limiting factor. But nonetheless, it still has to be explored, not only for water use, but for recreation and everything. And anybody who flies in over Dallas can see the difference between Dallas and several of these other cities that weren't any bigger than Dallas was 150 years ago. But that is just one garden. It's like the Garden of Eden there with the reservoirs they built and planned ahead, and it allowed that city to become a metropolis. I think it's the fourth biggest metro area in the country now, or fourth or fifth. It's all about the water, and some people plan ahead and they're smart, and other people sit around waiting for somebody to take care of it, and it doesn't happen, then you're lost. And I hope we're on the leading edge of this and thinking ahead for 100 years from now, not about how we could save our tax dollars for tomorrow, because somebody's going to end up paying the price on it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Keep in mind then too, that's, the recommendation of the master plan is to continue forward and monitor the situation with the Missouri River water rights that you do have, as that develops. And the second thing that we're seeing again in Colorado for those storage projects, they literally take decades from initiation to final construction, putting into service. That they are not short-term projects. They are long-term projects that take decades to develop. So that's part of the equation.
Yeah, they've got their greedy gold down there, don't they?
Yeah.
Really thought ahead.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you, sir, for the
Yep.
presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion on this?
I'll move to recognize the presentation.
There's been a motion by Evans and a second by Maher to acknowledge the presentation. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to an item from the Finance Office. Item number 14, introduction and first reading of ordinance number 6663, an ordinance regarding supplemental appropriation number 1 for 2025. And I go to Director Ainsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The item before you is consideration of the first reading for the first supplemental appropriation for the 2025 budget. The majority of the items that are included in that are simply carryover of projects or initiatives that were originally budgeted in 2024 but were not completed. And so all those funds from 2024 were not expensed, and so we're just seeking to add that budgeted authority into 2025 so that those projects and initiatives can continue. With that being said, though, I do want to highlight there are some additional functional changes that we are looking at making with this, and I want to ensure that the council is well aware of that. This really comes from a significant amount of studying that the Public Works Department, the Parks Department, and other departments have been doing in regards to how we are providing our services to the general public. And looking at a lot of the ongoing operational issues that we have, for several years, the city has relied significantly on outside contractors to complete a lot of duties and tasks. There are, of course, some tasks that are beyond the scope of what the city can perform, and so rightly those need to be completed by outside entities. But with that being said, there's a lot of tasks that are very typical that for the city to do. One such that I would like to highlight is just maintaining the grounds here at City Hall or at the RTS building. The city has contracts with outside entities that are at very high rates, that it would make sense for the city to make use of our professional landscapers that we have with the Parks Department to be able to complete that at a lower cost for the residents of Rapid City. So what this supplemental appropriation does is it identifies several line items in the 2025 budget that can be reduced or eliminated, and those services provided by staff members if we had the appropriate labor. And so what we're looking at doing is reducing a lot of those line items, and that more than covers the cost of getting the labor that's necessary to complete just those projects. In addition to that, though, that labor would be available so that whether it's the Parks Department, they would be able to take care of our medians and our parks in a better fashion than what they're currently doing. Our Streets Department, this actually would provide an entire crew that would be able to do mostly concrete patchwork as well as concrete repair work, but also some asphalt work. That crew would be paid for by several projects that our city engineer and his division oversees. That right now those projects, we have to design them, get quotes out and get bids out. Instead, we're able to provide those services on a much more immediate focus to our residents, but then that crew will also be available to make a lot of utility repairs and other things that we would otherwise be contracting out. I want to ensure that all of these individuals that we are looking at funding, they're not management, they're not mid-management type levels. They're truly the operators that would be getting the work of the people of Rapid City done, be doing it more affordably than what we're currently doing, and be getting additional projects done. And so that's kind of the two parts of this supplemental appropriation. We do have representatives of the various departments here. We do anticipate that this is probably only the first step. The mayor has challenged all the department directors to come up with more and more ways that we can be more efficient for the taxpayers to be able to get more projects done at a more affordable price. And so I think you're going to be seeing more and more of this kind of throughout the next several months, but this is kind of step one. Are there any questions?
Go to Pat Roseland.
Thank you, Director Ainsley. I think it's a great idea. I know yesterday at Public Works, it was brought up about downtown beautification and what can happen there. Right now, I think it's on a downward slide. It looks pretty tacky out there in the corners and intersections of our downtown. And I think hopefully this would be a big major part, if this works out, that the Parks Department and other areas of our city can work on that as a general duty every month, every week, whatever it needs to be done, that we don't have to look back, say, well, this needs to be done, or it should have been done. It's already there and looking great. So hopefully this would be a big part of using that plan to work really heavily on the downtown area. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Bill Evans.
You know, my brother, who has a big mansion on Minnehaha Parkway in Minneapolis, so belly aching about the high prices, the high taxes in Minneapolis. And they're about, I think, the 6th highest tax state in the nation. I think we're about the 4th lowest, somewhere in there. Wyoming's a little bit lower. And the reality is it takes money to pay for things and do things like that. He's belly aching about this or that, but the city maintains all the parkway trees. One dies, they plant a new one. They come through and they trim them. And so these are all things that are paid for by those taxes. So it takes money to do that. And we tend to not want to tax people to do those things. So sometimes they get undone. Well, I spoke with Mr. Ainsley yesterday. Is there a possibility we could somehow have a value-added tax, say, on alcohol sold in the nation, or in the city limits or the county even, that generates income for things that people want to have done, but they're not willing to raise their property tax to do? And I think an alcohol tax is something we should really explore to pay for things like we're talking about downtown beautification, cultural arts facilities and everything, things that people, they want and they use all the time, but they don't want to pay for them. So something like an alcohol tax, I really encourage us to explore that for the future, because I think it could generate some significant amounts of money that people wouldn't be upset about paying. So thank you.
We've got a motion by Bieberdorf and a second by Roseland to approve. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the Fire Department, item number 15. Resolution number 2025-030, a resolution declaring the City of Rapid City's support and adoption of the Payne County Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan and Community Wildfire Protection Plan 2024, and approve the mayor signing the Community Wildlife Protection Plan. And we'll go to the Fire Department. Thank you, sir. Chip.
if I may. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee, Dustin Willett, the Rapid City Pennington County Emergency Manager. So before you, again, is the beginning of the process to move this through to have Rapid City formally adopt the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan and the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We started this process back in '22. It's a long iterative process with lots of community feedback and public listening sessions and engagement with stakeholders and planning departments and engineers. We're pretty happy with the result of this effort. This is the first ever plan that is in a digital format. It leverages Esri.js story maps. So instead of a PDF plan on a shelf, this is an interactive, online hosted plan that allows folks a greater level of interactiveness with the material that's contained in that plan. So the reason both plans are before you is the planning process for Community Wildfire Protection Plan is very, very, very similar to the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan. It didn't make sense to bring the same people together to have the same discussion for two separate planning processes. So we've rolled the Community Wildfire Protection Plan inside of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, and it's worked beautifully so far, and we're happy with that process. However, they are two distinct plans in terms of some grant funding that each of those plans unlocks. So they require separate signature pages, both for the Natural Hazards Plan, which unlocks FEMA mitigation dollars, BRIC funding that the city uses on a regular basis. And then the Community Wildfire Protection Plan unlocks federal land management agencies. So typically Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, National Park Service type grants. So hence the reason for two different signatures, but it's the same document, same content, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
I would say, I apologize, Dustin, I saw you out there, I didn't know you were going to speak, but I'm glad that you're here and taking care of business, especially in light of what's happened, in places like in Hawaii and in LA and stuff like that. We got to have a plan, so I appreciate that. I guess Bill Evans has a comment.
Sorry I'm talking so much today. Anyhow, I just want to compliment you, Mr. Willett. I watch you guys in action. I've watched the whole emergency response thing. I've toured the facilities. I think most of the council has, if not everybody has, and it's very impressive what you do. I think you're an absolute great asset to this community, and I really applaud what you guys accomplished down there. I wish all of the employees would model after your behavior. I'm sure you're not one of those that waits for 4 o'clock and runs out the door. I can tell by what you guys get accomplished. So congratulations, and I'm sure everybody supports this. Thank you.
I'd echo that too, Dustin. We appreciate you.
Very humbled. It's a team effort. I've got an incredible staff, and it's an incredible community to be part of. Everybody carries water when we need to. So very, very grateful for those words, humbled by those words, but certainly want to acknowledge the fact that it's the folks that I work with.
Okay, thank you. Any motion on number 15? Motion approved by Bieberdorf and a second by Maher. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Next, Alderman items. Sorry again. We're all sorry, Bill. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, just a couple things to mention. There's been a lot of long trucks parked downtown. I've been getting complaints from business people and drivers, and I think we need to address that either through ordinance or just code enforcement or something. Perhaps there's streets downtown where those 23-foot-long trucks could be accommodated without pulling up on the sidewalks. I'm thinking maybe the parking lane is a little bit deeper on Kansas City. We need to explore some of these options so we don't drive out the ranchers that come downtown. Give them a place to park, but we also can't have them parking up on the sidewalks or causing people to veer into the next lane. It's going to cause damages. Another thing, and this is kind of related to that a little bit, I've had a suggestion from a couple constituents that we have an ordinance review committee started so that we can go get some of these, horseless carriage ordinances off the books. And it suggested that it be made up of everybody from former mayors and former council people just to average Joe on the street. So I think that's something we should also start exploring. And one last item. I checked with the city of Sioux Falls, where the Lloyd's company is headquartered. I said, when there's a large construction project that is going on in downtown Sioux Falls, what is your policy concerning closure of streets? They said, we have never in the history of the city allowed any private business to close a street. We give them one traffic lane. The rest remain open at all times. This was after speaking to one of their head of code enforcement. And so I've been bellyaching about this for 2 years, and I don't know who approved that to allow them to close that street, but I think we need to get them out of there now and get those semis off of 6th Street so that these people downtown can conduct their business. It's ridiculous to inconvenience them like that and have people wallowing around down there using it as a parking spot and gravel storage and everything else. They've got the entire traffic lane, the parking lane on St. Joe for entire city block. They could line those semis up along there if they need to. They don't need to be parked closing the other half of 6th Street. So we need to get on this now, and I don't know who in the world ever approved that. But every city I've talked to, not one other city allows a business to do that. So this is something that never needs to happen again in this town. So there you go. Thanks.
No, thank you, Bill. Good points. Get a motion to adjourn? Motion by Bieberdorf and a second by Roseland to adjourn. All in favor? All opposed? We're adjourned.